Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the founder and the host of the Rise Above Justice Movement and the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. All right, so I am back again. By now, if you haven't noticed, we're doing a candidate series where we are highlighting progressive candidates running all across the country, all the way from governor, all the way down to your local water board, because every single election matters. And today I'm joined by Chelsey, who is running for Congress in the state of Texas. Chelsey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive straight in. So walk us through, who you are, walk us through your background and why you are running for Congress.
I am, I get yelled at a lot for saying this, but I am just a mom that has gotten very, very, very pissed off at the way that the world is working right now. I am not seeing, well, not just right now, but in general. Um, I'm seeing such a lack of disregard. I can't speak today. I'm just seeing basically our kids' futures are going down the drain very quickly, and not just our kids, but kids around the world, as a result of our policies that we're kind of implementing as the US. And I have been heavily affected by reproductive rights. I have endometriosis and I've had multiple miscarriages. So when Roe was overturned, after sobbing on during my second high risk pregnancy, because I was about 20 weeks along when that happened, I had a fire lit under me. And after I got out of my postpartum haze and I was ready to fight, I just went full force into fighting our congressional representatives, cussing out Ted Cruz on a daily basis, and just pushing for representation, pushing for like empty chair town halls. I was hosting protests. I was trying to bring our congressional district together. And I was just really struggling with not being able to physically do anything for my children and their future. Because right now, like my daughter has less rights than I did, and I have less rights than my mother did. And my grandmother marched for women's liberation. So it's a heavy thing to process. My family was also very involved. My mom's side of the family, both her mom and her dad's side are Cherokee. We have documentation from her dad's side, and basically when they made it to Alabama, my great grandfather ended up being the first person that was white passing and helped desegregate a small town in Birmingham. So the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act are both very dear to me, and I've been very angry this week, especially with the decisions in Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama because of my background and because of my family's background. So I've always had a very strong sense of justice in me. And so that is a lot of why I fight the way that I fight. But am an, I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Maryland. But I moved down to Texas when I was 15. And since I moved down to Texas and the current time, it has gone rapidly downhill because of Abbott's leadership and just the Republican leadership in general in Texas. And so it's just been very dangerous. And I don't want my daughter to suffer through the same things that I did as she gets older. So yeah, that was a mouthful. And I think I kind of made that a circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can sense the passion that you have for these issues that we're going to be talking about because your website lays it out very, very well, which is chelseyhockettforcongress.com. And then I went to backslash issues, and that's where a lot of these questions are going to come from that I'm going to ask you. So let's dive in a little bit and talk about like ICE and DHS. So currently, both chambers of Congress are going back and forth with
Mhm.
arguing that we need more funding for ICE, we need less funding for ICE, we need funding for this, funding for that, funding for this, funding for that. It, it's as simple as abolish ICE. There
Yes.
is no reform to ICE and break up DHS. FEMA should be its own thing.
Yeah, FEMA should definitely be its own thing.
It's literally insane that it's under the Department of Homeland Security. That is beyond insane to me. It needs to be its own entity. It needs to function separately, and we need to abolish ICE. There is no reforming ICE. If you're older than 2003, which majority of us that are very active right now are, you're older than
Yes.
DHS, which
Yeah.
DHS was created out of alleged fear.
Mhm.
Thus brought on the Muslim tirade that the government went on. to try to deport every single
Yeah,
Muslim,
I
every
was
single
actually,
black and brown, and
yeah, I was living in Maryland during the 9/11 attacks. So that
oh,
is, because I'm from there. I was in elementary school. I was 8, and not to veer too far off of topic, but um, I was there during the creation of DHS. My mom, we couldn't get a hold of her. She worked for an insurance company that was, they would have been one of the first responders down to DC. My dad worked, he still works in between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. We had no idea where he was. My uncle was a construction supervisor in D.C., and he actually has worked on the White House, worked on the, let's see, White House, Capitol Building, the John F. Kennedy Center, and just throughout DC as a contractor. And my aunt worked for 40 years with the NIH in Bethesda. So when I'm telling you that 9/11 like heavily affected my family, it really did. And after DHS was created, my uncle, who is very dark complected with dark black curly hair as a construction supervisor driving a white truck, was profiled constantly. And
mhm.
so that's something that we regularly dealt with in the area of a lot of the incidents.
Yeah,
And so,
I can't even imagine.
yeah, so for me, like the ice part of that is a kind of like a home thing for me because my aunt and my uncle are another set of parents to me. Um, but abolishing ICE is at this point the only way to go. I've even been told, okay, well, we have other forms like INS that we can point back to, but they were also responsible for what the Mexican repatriation. A lot of those, and I mean, that also were responsible for interning Japanese people in camps
Mhm.
during World War II. So we have just a really bad history of treating immigrants horribly. And with the uptick in white supremacy, the fact that they're not drug testing or they are drug testing and they're still hiring people with drugs in their system. And I mean, there's no safety net. There's no like, let's retrain them, let's rehire, let's by the time that we go through all of that, we're going to be so far in debt
Mhm.
to
More
redevelop
than we
it
already
that
are. Yes.
more than we already are. Because they're not going to be able to function or work. And I mean, they even put the guy that shot but Renee Good
Oh my God.
back on duty.
Yes.
So I think we're so far past being able to reform anything, and they already have a really nasty history of just murdering immigrants for
Mhm.
absolutely no reason.
So let me ask you this. What's your thoughts on, the Dilley Detention Center? So this is, I mean, I kind of already know your opinion on this as what you've kind of already stated, but for those who don't understand or those who don't know, the Dilley Detention Center is one of the worst concentration camps, and I refuse to actually call it a detention center
Yep.
because let's be real, these are literally internment camps, these are literally concentration
I mean, they're
camps.
detaining children.
Uh, Yes, and it's so insane. A story that like literally shattered my heart is the Liam Ramos and his father,
Yeah.
being kidnapped from Minneapolis or Minnesota, right outside of Minneapolis, down to the Dilley Detention Center. I read an article just a couple weeks ago that Liam is now going through very intensive like therapy because of the trauma
Yeah.
that he faced during that entire process.
Yeah.
Five
And I
five
mean,
years old.
we have Liam, we have the little 2-month-old baby that had the
Yes.
respiratory issues. We had the mom that just gave birth and was chained to a bed afterward. Or I'm sorry, she was pregnant, miscarried, and then chained to a bed. I mean, they're not treating anybody well. We have the teenage girls that are pregnant out of seemingly nowhere. And we have a director, an ex-director that refused to acknowledge the fact that her agents could be responsible for sexually assaulting children. And I'm not a fan of Dilly. I don't want anything to do with Dilly. I want it closed down. I stand with Miss Rachel on literally everything that
Yes.
she said.
Yes.
Childhood literacy is important, and so I'm happy that we found her when we did, and I've just grown to love her more. But I don't think Dilly Detention Center needs to exist. I don't think a lot of these places need to exist. I mean, the fact that they're feeding food with maggots still, that people still aren't getting waters, they're leaving children in clothes that they urinated in because they were so scared for multiple days. Um, I mean, there's medical neglect. It's horrific conditions.
We collaborate with Ricky Longoria, aka the gay liberal that is based in Texas. And one of my favorite people in this entire world is definitely Ricky because he brings the energy and he's not afraid to tell the truth. He's not afraid to tell exactly what's going on. And I just did a podcast episode with him. I did one whenever first started this podcast last year. And he shared about his experiences of being down at some of the protests that were going on very recently at the Dilley Detention Center. And I agree. We just got word that the alligator Alcatraz,
It's reopening.
air quotes, they're actually closing it at
They're
the,
closing it again?
yes,
Okay, because
yes.
I just saw that they were opening it back up and that they were clear to keep it open.
Yes, based on what I understand, it looks like they are closing it.
Good.
CNN broke it last night, which I know how like corporate and mainstream media is. They like to play this fiddle. Obviously we talk a lot about like money in politics. There's also money in media,
So much.
and it's controlled opposition. You have CNN, you have MSN, or I guess it's MS now, NBC, you have Fox News, you have all of these. When in reality, we could have had fully funded NPR and
Yeah.
PBS, like the
PBS.
public media that I grew up on.
And then all of the stations that are under those umbrellas that everybody forgot about.
Yes. Yes, and they are relying very heavily on donations right now because their
Yeah.
funding was literally cut.
Yeah.
And we have a really good NPR station here in Kansas City, where I am based. And they had essentially, they were based on the University of Missouri, Kansas City campus, but abruptly had to move their office. And now they're in like a very tiny space. And they were not given any warning, nothing. Universities kind of like wipe their hands from it.
Yeah.
And as somebody who grew up on public media, I used to watch Sesame Street. I used to
Yeah.
watch Mr. Rogers.
Yep.
You
I just
know,
made my
I
kids start watching Mr. Rogers.
oh
Because we have the
yes,
PBS app. So I'm like, all
yes,
right, Mr. Rogers it is. And then I'm like, that's Daniel Tiger. That's what this is. We talk about that. My daughter has a Mr. Rogers book.
I love it.
Sorry.
And Miss Rachel, no, that's
But yeah,
perfect.
I
This
mean, it's important. The childhood literacy, like that, PBS contributed to that, and it gave a lot of people, especially people that didn't have easy access to schools, a way to learn.
yes, yes, 100%. Absolutely agree. And Miss Rachel is literally the Mr. Rogers of this
Mhm.
generation. I freaked out a couple months ago because we did a collaboration post with some of our collaborators. And then I leave home and I head over to my mom's. My partner's driving the car, and I like it's kind of like one of those like knee jerk reactions. Like you can't control like what's gonna happen because you're like in that moment. But Miss Rachel followed us, and I about lost my shit. If I'm
Yeah.
being fully honest, I hit my partner's arm and I was like, "Holy fucking crap! Miss Rachel just followed us," and I was like, and she's like, "You about made me crash the car because of that." I said, "You don't understand." As
Miss Rachel is
somebody,
the only one that I want right now following me on anything. I am so sick, especially with the Met Gala. I'm so sick of
yes,
celebrities. I'm so sick of politicians. I don't
yes,
idolize anybody at this point except for Miss Rachel, and a
because
little
no,
bit of Blippi.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I yeah, I entirely agree. And I feel that Mr. Rogers would be flipping tables. I mean, he didn't
Yeah.
just testify at Congress for no reason, right?
Yeah, and I mean he
He
was one of the first ones to he brought a black police officer onto his
mhm,
show and
mhm,
shared a pool with him
yep,
during desegregation, and that was such a landmark moment in public media to see on TV. And that was one of the first times that we got representation for a lot of our community that was learning from PBS Kids. And
yes,
so Mr. Rogers was iconic, and I believe Miss Rachel will be the same.
yeah, no, 100%, absolutely. Now let's kind of dive in a little bit and talk about like mass incarceration.
Mhm.
So I know this topic is very near and dear to me, as it is to you. This is something that obviously we advocate to abolish with the
Yeah.
rise of justice movement because there is no reforming to the system. When the
Yeah.
system was built and exactly how it's functioning now is exactly how it was designed.
Yeah.
And it was not made for anybody other
There's no
than white.
rehabilitation. Yeah.
Like, let's be real. We see in it, everybody took to the streets with George Floyd,
Yeah.
Dante Wright, Philando Castile. and numerous others, Breonna Taylor, Sonia Massey. Like we see the police brutality running very rampant in our communities, just like ICE is. It's very important to distinguish that ICE does not function or is functioning as law enforcement, but they are not law enforcement. There is a very distinct difference. However, a lot of the local police departments have this thing called a 287G contract,
Yep.
where a police department can enact and then they start essentially doing some of those functions of those federal agents and cooperating with ICE agents. However, there is no state or federal law that requires local law enforcement to cooperate with federal agents
Right.
yet. Some states have enacted that, but as of right now, there is nothing federally as of yet. Obviously, we know how this is going to go. We have Trump for 2 more years. We know what he's already done and what this administration has already done, and it's quite a bit. People were warned with Project 2025. I didn't think it was that serious to begin with, and then I started looking into it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is really bad." And then you look at this Project 2025 tracker, and we're like 63 or 60 something percent of it,
Yeah.
completed.
Completed.
Luckily, a lot of it is all policy.
Yep.
So, it's
A lot
literally
of it can be
policy,
reversed,
but
hopefully.
yes, we just got
Yeah.
to get the right people. And that's why we need to get you elected to Congress to make sure that that does happen and to push back, right? But thinking about mass incarceration, I watched before we started recording, you mentioned about Alabama, so I'm going to go with
Mhm.
my thought on this. I watched a documentary called The Alabama Solution, and this documentary made my mouth drop. Like I knew the conditions that prisoners are facing across the country are horrific. I
Yeah.
just didn't realize how horrific it actually was until I watched this documentary. Have you watched that documentary?
I have not, but I did have an uncle incarcerated in an Alabama jail. So,
Do you feel comfortable
oh, it
kind
might have been
of like,
Maryland. I can't. It was before I was born. He was in a car accident with one of his girlfriends at the time. He'd only had one girlfriend at the time that we know of. But she was killed in it. So it was basically vehicular manslaughter. They still have no idea who was driving, but he felt so bad about it. He took full blame for it, and he was like, "I need to." That was basically the way that he decided he was going to deal with it. He wasn't going to fight it, and he wanted to do the time for it. So he went in, and they put him pretty quickly into like a minimum security kind of thing. He wasn't really a big risk, and he worked really hard. He worked in the kitchen. He did whatever it was, kept his head down, stayed quiet. Um, but he saw what was happening in a lot of the areas, and it's just there's a lot of mistreatment. Um, he had an easy stay. That's what I will say compared to what he saw from other people. Um, but as you kind of get older and you see how prisoners are treated, what the inside looks like, the makeup and everything else, it gets very primal between social groups and
mhm.
many other things. So it's not a pleasant place to be.
I came out as LGBTQ back in 2000 and oh my God, it feels like an eternity ago. It was whenever I didn't realize that the day that I came out was actually National Coming Out Day,
Mhm.
which I believe is October 11th. Don't quote me on the exact day, but I believe it is October 11th. And I came out that year. And one of the first things that I researched was Matthew Shepard. I heard about his name. I heard about, and this kind of along the lines with the mass incarceration, police brutality, hate crimes, because the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Act was signed by Barack Obama. And obviously, we need to end the gay trans panic defense because if you
Yeah.
go in and somebody essentially somebody can murder somebody who is gay or trans and they can say, oh, I murdered them because they are gay or trans, which we see this a lot with Black trans women,
Mhm.
which we don't talk nearly about enough until they are already murdered.
Yeah.
And it is an epidemic that has been overlooked. There have been a couple trans murders here in Kansas City metro area. Brooklyn Lindsay was murdered a couple years ago while walking on a sidewalk. And I attended the vigil for that, and it was horrific. I don't believe that they caught the person who killed her. So it is essentially a cold case.
Mhm.
Anybody fact checking this, be sure to correct me if I'm wrong, but there has been no updates. Because, well, there might be updates. We just don't know about it because mainstream media is not covering it because it's not a
Yeah.
hot topic anymore. And it's not making them money and it's not making those clicks, right? But thinking about like expanding like hate crime statutes, what do you
Mhm.
propose as far as addressing hate crimes as exactly as they are? Because we also see this with our immigrant communities, more specifically like Muslim communities. We
Yeah.
see this very heavily, especially with everything that's going on right now with ISVHS and the genocide in Gaza. And
Yeah.
we have Zohran Mamdani that is elected in New York City as the New York City mayor. Thank God. Because we cannot have a sex pest as Andrew Cuomo.
No.
We cannot have somebody like that. And I'm fortunate enough to know Lindsay Boylan, who
Mhm.
was the woman who came out against him. She was the whistleblower, and came out against him about sexual harassment. She
Yeah.
used to work as an aide whenever he was the governor. But
I mean,
thinking
I find
about
it one just shocking how many people don't believe that women are harassed when we are literally harassed on a daily basis at work. I was as a teenager by my boss that was in his 40s. So I mean, I just gross. But definitely strengthening the Equality Act. Leading back to the civil rights time, I think we need to make sure that we put a lot more provisions in there for like what constitutes a hate crime. So that way they're not just getting off easy. I know being able to prove stuff, especially right now with I know it's Voting Rights Act, but with the Supreme Court overturning the Louisiana maps, or not overturning them, but saying like, yeah, it's cool, go ahead, go for it. You're allowed
Mhm.
to. Oh, no, it wasn't Louisiana that did that, but you know what I'm talking about. We all know
Yes,
what we're talking about right now with Tennessee and everything else happening, where it just set off like an entire like chain reaction of horrific
sure
behavior
has.
by the Republicans in legislative positions in the Deep South. So we need to strengthen one, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but we also need to strengthen the Civil Rights Act and include what constitutes a hate crime, and put forth parameters that like, okay, was this person part of an oppressed minority? Like, where are they at? Where are they, investigative and putting that foot forward first instead of disproving immediately. Does that make sense?
Yes, it
So,
does.
I mean, if they're trans, if they're in an area that has, heavy, I guess not really KKK activity because they've
Mm,
mostly disbanded, but things like Tactical Civics and the other, I know they didn't disband. But the people that are a little bit more upfront, how they've rebranded and they have different names, they have different groups, but looking at places that have actual groups like that and who they target, like that needs to be one of the first things investigated. Because as far as I'm
mhm.
concerned, black men don't lynch themselves, like, or they don't hang themselves from trees. They're not going to do that. And
Exactly.
the fact that we're ignoring that entire aspect in the cases in Mississippi and it's ruled a suicide immediately without being investigated as a possible lynching, is just absolutely insane to me. So on the trans front, on the crime against the Black community, on the crimes against immigrants, on Muslims. It needs to be addressed as an oppressive issue first, and then followed and investigated shortly, or investigated in that manner until they can definitively prove that that wasn't the issue, kind of
Yeah,
thing, instead of
thank you for mentioning about Mississippi. Just this last September, we learned about the horrific story of Trey Reed.
yeah.
And that one,
Oh,
at
I bawled.
yeah, no,
Living in
I'm with you.
I lived in Mississippi for about a year and a half. I lived in Columbus, worked in Starkville, worked in Hattiesburg, worked in Jackson, and I worked in Oxford. And Hattiesburg was probably my favorite place in the entire world, out of the places that I worked. And so seeing him lynched, and then also a homeless man in Vicksburg lynched around the same time.
Mhm,
I just, at
mhm.
that point that it is a hate crime, and just the fact that it's not investigated as such is just a whole KKK is law enforcement. Um, And
Facts.
of course, everybody wants to disprove it and everybody wants to defend the police, but they're not willing to, look into the bad that's happening. And when we go back to, mass incarceration and everything else too, I just blame everything on Reagan 99% of the time, as one should. But between Contra coming in, the cocaine versus crack versus, every other version of that, just to target these people, making marijuana illegal, just to target and like disrupt the nuclear family for the Black community, and basically put them into a tailspin and then blame Black women for being a drain on the system after removing the men from society. I I'm over watching people defend all of those things and say, no, it's just the bad people. It's just this, it's just that. I mean, it gets to the point for me where my daughter comes home from school and she's like, we learned about police officers today and that they're here to help the community. I'm like, well, have you ever heard about the sugar factory? And we'll take it all
Mhm.
the way back to that point in time, how the police force was created. And then I even talked to her. I mean, she is 6, so I try to keep it pretty mild as far as like what details are discussed, but she knows that a lot of horrific things have happened, and that it is a taxpayer funded department that needs to be held accountable for committing crimes on the communities that they're supposed to be serving. I mean, my daughter and I even listened to a thing on Fred Hampton and his assassination
Mm.
by the CIA. Um,
Mhm.
and we talked about the Black Panthers, like from that point. Like I told her about what all the good stuff that they did for the community and self-policing because the police were coming in and they were responsible for some of the murders that were happening and they were
Mhm.
escalating the violence. And so I try to make her very aware of that, because not everybody has the same experience. And just
You know
because
what Republicans are going to say you're doing?
what?
They're going to say you're indoctrinating your child.
Oh my goodness. I'm teaching her history, accurate history.
First of all, okay, I'm going to say this. Thank you so much for mentioning Fred Hampton. So many people do not understand how critical it is for his story to continue living on. He was
Yeah.
murdered in 1968 or 1968 or 1969 for literally going against the systems that he was
Yeah.
working to abolish
Yeah.
and then also like hold them accountable. And
I mean, it
it
worries me just because of the stuff that the Black Panthers were able to do and that Fred Hampton was able to do for his community because we have a lot of mutual aid groups within DSA, which is why I think DSA is targeted as well. But there are a lot of mutual aid groups that help out the community surrounding them. I know in Dallas they do sandwich tables, they do where they have
Mhm.
clothes and they like hand them out. They help out with immigration stuff and they go to processes, they go to procedures. They're translators for other people. And a lot of that is going to get targeted by the city, by the police, by everything else as being
Of
disruptive to the
course.
community. But we also have programs like Feed the City where they're going in and making a bunch of lunches for school kids. And we have food pantries that directly serve school districts. And it worries me that a lot of these are going to get targeted soon after they cut off all of the benefits because they want a hungry community. So, um, listening
How pro
to
how pro life, right?
Yeah. So, but like listening to the stories of the past kind of help us prepare for what's going to happen in the future because the system's following the same footsteps over and over and over again.
And it's working exactly how it was designed and working exactly how, yeah, I mean, literally how it was designed. Now, thinking about, the like affordability, we talk a lot about affordability. We hear it a
Mhm.
lot. It goes deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you mentioned about Reagan earlier, so I'm going to bring this up. It's Chelsey. It's kind of like you know, trickle down economics literally doesn't work. And it
No.
literally fucks over the poor and the working class.
Yes.
And it helps that top 1% people like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Stephen Miller, Christy Gardenome. Yes,
Yeah.
I call her Gardenome because that's what she reminds me of. And then also like Gregory Little Boots, who used to be over Border Patrol, but I call them all those names. I sound like Jennifer Welch,
I know
which
she's the
from the
best. Yes. I
from the
follow
iPad.
Jen and Angie. I listen to every single day.
Yes.
I was like, I just have it on. I've introduced a lot of people to it. They're like, more people should talk like this in the news. And I'm like, yes.
Oh, I agree.
Yes.
It would be so much easier to sit back and just listen and watch. I'm getting into like the political commentary myself.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
mean, listening to
it's
people just as angry as you are give you the
yes.
news is so cathartic.
And it actually helps me sleep at night.
Yeah, I
Oh,
was like,
you know what? Maybe that's actually my marijuana doing that because
oh, yeah. That might help. Yeah. It's I have Dan Patrick. I can't. Dan
Oh,
Patrick is
there's not
just
enough
like
weed in the
worst
world to
nightmare.
deal with that shit.
No, but he hates it. So he actually targets marijuana like frequently, and they even made
Mhm.
CBD and THC legal in certain forms in Texas, and he has been fighting to almost immediately undo it. And he
Of
got really
course he
mad at
is,
Abbott because Abbott had kind of approved one of the bills that had passed. And
which I'm surprised.
yeah, me too. But don't worry because Dan Patrick's trying to ruin it on a regular basis.
Of
But we
course.
have Vicky Goodwin and Marcos Velez running to unseat
Mhm.
him. So we'll see how that turns out on May 26th. But I think
Speaking of which,
either
you
one
have
of
your runoff on May 26th too.
yes.
How are you? What's been this experience been like, or what has this experience running for Congress been like for you?
It's been very eye-opening on the political process of everything. I have not run for anything ever, and I moved around enough to where I wasn't super involved in a lot of the programs that were, the Democratic programs and everything else too, getting in touch with the county chairs and all of that until more recently, because like I said, I went through a whole postpartum depression and haze and all of it with some reproductive issues in the middle, but I kept up with everything that was happening in the world. And um, now that I have started running for office, while it's going well, I don't want to fundraise the way that everybody fundraises because we're sitting here
Mhm.
calling people that are well off, begging for money, pulling that in, which I know it's important to run, but it takes away from being able to get out and talk to people. It takes away from block walking. It takes away from um, phone banking people to remind them to go vote. Not even that, like, I don't want money from you. I just want you to go to the polls. Like, it takes away the sincerity of trying to help when you're focused on money to that degree. And then we also like everybody that's in my area that's running right now that's on the ticket for like the Senate district and the House districts, they are so new to it, just like I am. And we want to work together. We want to get the word out
Mhm.
together. We want to block walk together. We want to do this. And we have people coming in as consultants and as everything else saying, you need to be selfish, stop working with other people, don't do this, don't do that. And it defeats the entire purpose. And it's you need $20,000 by the end of this month. For what? Cannot answer the question. So it's just to continue on. It feels like a grift. And
It
that's
is a
probably
grift,
going to upset
and
a lot of people.
no,
And I've
yeah.
done well organically, not anywhere near like me fundraising and calling a bunch of people that have money, but just the people that find me, the people that, set up recurring donations for me, the people that will like come in and give me a good chunk of money because they believe in what I'm saying, not because I'm calling them and begging for donations instead of talking to the people that are important, the everyday people that are affected. I live in a historically Black neighborhood that this was a sundown town. We're on the other side of the railroad tracks. We are, every connotation of a heavily segregated neighborhood in a past like past Jim Crow era. That is the neighborhood that I live in. We have generational land. The houses are passed down to their kids. They're taking on their parents' bills, or they're 84 and will be out of debt for the first time a year from now. They are picking up second, third jobs because they need to pay for their medical care. They are living in houses that are nearly condemned just to survive and can't afford to fix anything because medical bills are too expensive, because gas is too expensive. We have people that are, regularly relying on public transportation that the city is currently trying to defund in order to make it to doctor's appointments. And it's, we don't even have roads that you can drive on. We don't even have sidewalks in most of the streets. So we have kids walking to school in the Black neighborhood to the other side of the street of across a major highway in a ditch the entire way
Mhm.
because the roads are this big. It goes straight down like this, and it's not safe. So it's literally putting the kids of this community in this neighborhood specifically in harm's way. And I know I talk a lot about the Black community, but it's because it's here and it's something that my family fought for decades. And I can't watch the work that all of these people have put in to gain rights to seeing their kids murdered on the side of the road in a school shooting. And I mean, when my daughter was in pre-K 3, first week of school, a kid was shot dead on the corner of a high school off of the property on his way to school. Sorry, I laugh out of discomfort, not actual.
No,
Um,
I feel that. I do too.
so it's just really hard being in a place like this. I told you I've lived in Mississippi. My family is from the deep South. Like this is not something that's new to me. This is something that I have grown up in. And this is something that I have been learning about since day one. I was at Rosa Parks viewing. I have all of my books lined up in a row. I have all my Black History books, and my daughter has the same thing. I did take Oprah out of her lineup, and I put in Albert Einstein because he was one of the only professors to teach at an HBCU. And Oprah Winfrey is a sellout. But I
Oh,
just, I,
there it is. I was waiting on that.
yeah. I mean, especially after everything that happened in La Hui with the fire and the fact that she refused to open a road and could have killed all of the people that were native to the island, working the island for the tourist area. Anyways,
Yeah.
um, it is something for me that is a constant in my face issue. And it's not something that I can ignore. I can't sit here and like run and be like, oh yeah, everything's fine here. Like, let's look somewhere else. So, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
where I am on the subject. And that's probably one of my biggest issues. One of the very first things that I did was sign a pledge for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act be because it is a very important thing to me. Um, I would, I'm a Democrat, but I'm mad about it at this point in time because of the way that everybody's been acting. But I also was very big on the version of the Green Party that focuses on climate and social justice. So that's kind of where I feel like a lot of people are. But
Yeah.
of course there's no movement in parties outside of the two-party system.
No, of course, which is why we need to abolish the two-party system so everybody has that equal representation and
I
it's an equal playing field.
Yeah, and a way to start that movement for us in Texas, we have a decent progressives chat. They're pushing ranked choice voting at the state convention level to push it further and further up. So,
Yep. I
um,
got my first taste of RCV whenever I voted in Minneapolis, and I fell in love with the system, and I love it. And I believe we need to expand it, and it needs to be in all 50 states to make it an even playing field. We need to get rid of this two-party system. It's very obvious that both parties are not meeting the moment. And
yeah, not at all.
you know how you mentioned just a little bit ago about like the contractors and like the advisors coming in, and they're like, oh, you have to raise, XYZ for this and this and that. And they don't ever give you an exact reason. And that
Yeah,
literally gets rid of that grassroots effort
movement. Yeah.
and that movement.
And I know grassroots, and it's such a trigger word right now because everybody uses it for everything. But it's a team that I would not have expected that's pushing a lot of that stuff. Because it seemed like a grassroots effort, but then when you look into it, like it is still very corporate, like in the way that it's running. So I don't want to sit there and do everything the way that everybody else has been doing it forever because it's not a system that's been working for us. It's a system that's been working against us, and I don't want to sell out.
Yep. And it seems like people began running progressive. People, and another word that's thrown around very heavily is progressive.
Yeah.
And because, Cory Booker uses progressive. Dude, you're on a book tour that whenever you should be holding town hall in your district and actually fighting for your district and not continuing the genocide and taking
Yeah.
this APAC money and
The big eye opener for me with him just in full. I mean, there are a lot of signs ahead of it, but just the filibuster and then nominating five Trump choices behind it. Like I'm just less than 24 hours later,
we need
completely
people
undermined it.
we need people in office to be more like Rashida Tlaib,
Yes.
like Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Presley. These are my
Those are
favorites.
three of my favorite. I
And you
absolutely
also
adore
have
them.
Pramila Jayapal, you have
Yes.
Emily Randall. There's a lot of really, really good ones, right?
Yeah. Ayanna
And
Presley is my all-time favorite in a politician way.
mhm,
Not in a hero way, but she says so much and so little and is so to the point, and I love her so much. I've been very happy following her, and she's one of the ones that take a lead from on a lot of
mhm,
policy stances and everything as well,
mhm.
because I'll see her, and I know she's been calling for the abolishment of ICE since like 2018, and she's been pushing a lot of the progressive side of things,
Yes.
um, a lot better than the progressives. And that second progressives is in quotation marks.
We need more like them and less like John
Yes.
Fetterman. um,
Uh, that's not even a question. That is,
we need more like Ayanna Presley, and I have to agree with you. And I think whenever we first, because we collaborate with a lot of Congress members, but
Mhm.
honestly, I think I want to see more collaborations with like this movement that I have built and my co-founders have built, and collaborate with more Congress members who like Ayanna Presley, which we do. We collaborate with her
Yeah.
very closely.
Mhm.
We also collaborate with, like I said, Camilla Jayapal and Randall. You know, we have like all these other very, very, very progressive voices that believe in transparency. And speaking of transparency,
Mhm.
um, Epstein.
Yes.
Let's dive in and talk about Epstein. And I've had the distinct honor of sitting down and interviewing two of the Jeffrey Epstein survivors. And one was Jess Michaels, the other one was Marina Lacerda, who was also known as victim number one in the 2019 Jeffrey Epstein case. She recently broke her silence as of last year at a press
She's the
conference.
one that had the cases from like 1996 and like it was it the early 1990s
It
that
was a,
it had
yeah, it
started
was,
like through Clinton and everybody else. Like she had, I believe.
yeah, you know, it's hard to kind of like pinpoint when each one of their journeys started because there's so much that has come out about it. But you know,
Yeah.
Pam Bondi literally broke multiple laws,
Yeah.
broke the Epstein Transparency Law and the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And, you know, survivors are forces to be reckoned with, are resilient. You and I
Yeah.
say this as a survivor myself, and this movement was founded by survivors for survivors and walking alongside survivors and our allies, but it's turned into a lot more than that. But I stay true to the roots because just yesterday, you know, a group of the Epstein survivors were down in Palm Beach. That was the first time that any of the survivors ever testified before members of Congress.
Mhm.
And we also collaborate with Oversight DIMS, which, you know, is doing this Epstein investigation. And they're advocating for the transparency, you know,
Yeah.
and they're having the survivors come forward and share their stories so way the public knows it. And we, whenever it comes to survivors, you know, survivors don't report to police for very obvious
Yeah.
reasons. I attempted to report my sexual assault to my local police department, and I was met with prejudice. You know,
Yes.
I was met with, oh, well, you're a male. Why didn't you fight him off? Or were you not strong enough to fight him off? My mom looks over at me and she was, because she went with me, because, you know, obviously I'm very distraught with like, what just happened to me? And she's like, oh, we need to go to the police. We need to make this report, you know, yada, yada, yada. And we get in there and I received the exact opposite of what you see on TV, right? You know, I grew up watching Special Victims Unit,
Yeah.
right? We need Olivia Benson in
In
all of our police
every department.
departments. Speaking of which, I had a mini heart attack the other day. I was mentioning about Miss Rachel, but there was a even more personal one to me that followed us on Instagram, and it's Mariska Hargitay. Whenever I tell you my fucking heart sank,
Yeah.
I can't even put into words what that meant for me because not only does she play a badass cop on TV, she is a badass human being and she's
Yes.
also a survivor herself. She is the founder of the Joyful Heart Foundation, which has been working to end the rape kit backlog
Hmm.
in all 50 states. And it's now in all 50 states because Maine just signed on to that and just, you know, put money towards ending the rape kit backlog. So my question to you is we're ending the rape kit backlog. Now, how do we make sure that there's still accountability, there's still transparency, there's still protections of survivors? How do we make sure that that rape kit backlog doesn't continue to be a backlog? In 2026, we should have no such thing as a backlog.
No,
There
we
also
shouldn't.
shouldn't be anything as a cold case, you know, for like rape, murder, you know, trafficking, etc. We should have no such thing with the way the technology is now. They can
Yeah.
be testing this DNA. They could be testing it. It all comes down to a policy choice, and it comes down to funding. And whenever
Funding
we don't fund those, we are
is
saying it is okay
to continue on
for, yeah, exactly.
for
So
Yeah. I mean, again, funding, just making sure that we're keeping up with it. But I don't know if it needs to be codified or what would need to happen in order to keep it going. Because I know funding, not necessarily would codify funding, but codifying something that would allow perpetual funding into an institution similar. Because I grew up with an aunt that worked for the NIH for 40 years. My grandmother's third husband was also a scientist. He was one of the first ones to work on HIV before they knew what it was. Um, it shouldn't happen, right? Like we cleared a backlog and it should never back up again. And that literally comes down to continuously funding a department without any gaps in coverage. Because when you have that gap, you lose the scientist, you lose the science, you lose everything else behind it, and you have to start over again. Um, I mean, my aunt did grant funding, so it was kind of just like we always put this portion of money into this department always, and it doesn't ever leave that department. And so that is something that you could 100% work for is establishing a set amount of money towards it, similar to like the maternal health crises that we're seeing, and similar to everything else, where we just need to set money aside for that and keep it there, by taxing the 1%, and making sure the corporations are paying their money, to be able to take care of our survivors and to be able to take care of our mothers and to be able to take care of our children. Because if we can take care of them, we can take care of the rest of the country.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yep, I was like, but yeah, funding is all it comes down to, and making sure that it keeps up. It's the same thing as well for me as immigration courts, where we have backlogged cases and the judges can't keep up with their courts. And people are waiting years and getting deported and having just
Mhm.
not able to work and not able to do anything else, which is more likely that crime is going to be committed at that point in time
And we're
when
so
people can't
focused
eat.
about brown men with tattoos. I think about Kilmar Abrego Garcia specifically,
Hmm.
and targeting our immigrant communities whenever immigrants are literally what makes America great.
Yeah.
And this nation was built on the backs of slavery, on the backs of our immigrant Black and brown neighbors and our community
Well,
members. And
it's not even just that. A lot of people don't
yeah,
realize either that the people that were kidnapped from Africa and the Ashanti Kingdom were also Islamic.
yep,
And
yep,
we literally broke them of their religion, told
yep,
everybody that they were heathens, made them fix the country so everybody else could survive, and then have completely disregarded the fact that they were not Christian, they were Islamic. And so when I
mhm,
tell people, I'm like, this specifically has been in the country longer than we have. We have literally brought immigrants into the country. Immigrants brought immigrants into the country, via slavery. And that is literally what our entire country is founded on. There's no reason
exactly.
that we should be sending people back out of the country when we didn't
No,
even come here legally.
exactly. And my grandmother was Native American,
Mhm.
and she was a part of the Cherokee tribe. And one of the things that she taught me from a very young age is the true definition of love thy neighbor,
Mhm.
which includes your disabled neighbor. It includes your trans neighbor. It includes your immigrant neighbor. And she said more specifically, the immigrants, because no human being is illegal on stolen land.
Mhm.
And she taught me that from a very young age. And ever since then, I've always believed that.
Yeah.
And it's more of I just grew up around morals. I
Yeah.
did. And I grew up understanding what it meant to love unconditionally. And she taught me that from a very, very young age. I was
Yeah.
raised by two very powerful women. You mentioned about your grandmother.
Mhm.
My grandmother also went to a lot of women's marches. She went to a lot of women's protests. She advocated for reproductive rights. She believed
Yeah.
in healthcare. She
Oh,
believed in like,
our grandmothers probably would have gotten along pretty well. My grandmother, she got pregnant when she was 15 by a 22-year-old. So that's already a good start, right? And she had three kids by the time that she was 21. She ended up being a single mom. So in the 70s, when she was trying to survive as a single mom with three kids, she was being denied apartments because she was a single mom. She was not being taken care of. She wasn't home. The kids got into a lot of trouble. If she would, her second husband, the reason that she has so many husbands is because they were abusive, but her second husband, after 6 months, had tried to murder her. And my aunt was able to get down the street to an officer's house. Like one of her neighbors was an officer, and they were able to get in and basically like stop it, but couldn't charge him with much of anything because he was part of the community. He was a white male in the community and had standing in the community. Um, and but while she was with her first husband, that was the father of the three kids, she was crossing picket lines to take my aunt to school and then started taking other kids from the community to school. And over the course of like that first year, she took hundreds of kids to school during desegregation. And her father-in-law was working to desegregate the community as well. And he was working with Black leaders in the community, meeting in cornfields in the middle of the night, to push those movements forward. But my grandmother is just such a badass in everything that she's done, and she has really fought for that. Um, but she has been through hell and back her entire life. She had an abusive mom. She had, a lot of other stuff going on. My Cherokee side of it is on her first husband's side. That's where, we stem from. They're from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian. We're on the Dawes Report. We're on the Baker Reports. We're in all of those. And a lot of them were pushed over into Oklahoma. A good bit of them just left the reserve because they didn't want to be under government control. But my family was born mostly in Caldwell County, which was also taken away from the Cherokee Reservation, um, and given out to, the other people to settle the area. So when they had pushed in and they taken that away is when our family started migrating into other states, but they're indigenous to Georgia. But they, my grandmother has literally fought for all of that. And I grew up with that love in me, but my mother somehow ended up being a white Christian nationalist for a long time, and we have moved through that and past that, and we're working on it every single day. And I'm trying to rewire her brain. Um, all of that to say, I don't remember what my point was. Oh, the love
I
thy
think
neighbor. I
yes.
like now to like we have moved past that point with my mother, and I've been reteaching her, and I know what my background is and what my family has done and what my ancestry looks like, and I'm teaching my daughter that at an early age. And we listen to Woody Guthrie, we listen to Pete Seeger, This Land Is Your Land, we listen to to all of the union stuff, and because I want her to know like we work together as neighbors and we love our neighbors and we respect our land. And that's a big thing for me and my family.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you been out like canvassing like your community and kind of like
Yes.
talking to people? What are some of the concerns that you are hearing from them? I'm seeing one common thing across the country, and
Healthcare
it
and debt,
is so that, and then there's also the AI
water.
data centers.
Yep.
And speaking of healthcare debt, just a shameless plug here. I'm a member of the DSA here in Kansas City. And last year, I attended an event where they wiped out like, and it was like some of the other like DSA chapters across like the Midwest, but they wiped out the medical debt. They did like comedy shows and like wiped out wiped out the medical debt and raised
Mhm.
millions of dollars to wipe out, or yeah, it worth millions of dollars of
That's incredible.
getting rid of that medical debt. I'll send you more. I will send you info on that,
Yeah.
just so we can kind of like see that and talk about that because it's incredible to see that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thinking about the AI data centers and some of
Mhm.
the other concerns that you're hearing about whenever you've been out canvassing, what are some of those concerns and what are people focused on right now?
So we have a couple different sects, because we have the Democrats, the hardcore Democrats in the area. I talk to them obviously when we go to meetings and we do all of that stuff. You have the more progressive people in the Dallas area that'll talk about the
Mhm.
social issues, and then we do have just the day-to-day people. So the day-to-day people, the biggest concern right now for everybody is healthcare and how much everything costs, because that is directly affecting wallets. Nobody's even thinking about data centers because they're so distracted by the fact that they literally can't afford life. And then we go into the Democratic parties, and between Kaufman County and Van Zandt County and Henderson County, they're all very concerned about the AI data centers and the fact that our resources are going unprotected. We have a water board meeting um, next, I think it's on May 27th, in Austin. But we have three data centers, two in Henderson County, one in Forney, and possibly another one in Dallas that they're trying to put in. And they're trying to use an aquifer that we have in Henderson County they want to pump 15 billion gallons of water out of it every year. It's already drying up. before they're putting that extra tax on it, and it's being led by a billionaire who is attacking every county and every application process from all sides to try and sue them and to gain access to it. And it's also the same area that another billionaire, his name is Monty Bennett, the one trying to get the water is Kyle Bass, but Monty Bennett is a hotelier in Dallas, and he is taking land. And our congressional representative, when he was in the state house, had it declared as private property. He took it over, and they've been trying to condemn land and declare eminent domain on a lot of the generational land out there to gain access to the water and everything else as well. So we've already had a tax on this from, the mid 2010s and forward, and a lot of people don't know about that, and they're not going to realize that it's an issue until it's past an issue. The one thing that we had as well was a sustainable city that was funded by Saudi nationals. So they were trying to come in, build a sustainable city similar to ones that they have in Qatar. And it was like the face of it was May Musk. And they shut it down pretty quickly, but nobody looked into the data centers behind it either. So they basically like used it, dangled it, and then everybody kept quiet about everything else because they didn't want a bunch of Muslims coming in and living in an AI city. So it's just a very they're literally using these to trap people into not fighting back on other stuff.
Yeah, and it's using a lot of, like you said, a lot of local resources, the water, and they're also
Yes.
creating like subclimates
Yeah.
like outside of them because of how much like pollution like they're putting off, and it's
Yep.
creating like these like its
Very
own
toxic
like
environments.
weather. And I'm thinking about like Memphis, Tennessee.
Yes. The asthma increase rate and everything else that's happening
Yes,
there.
which is
And that
pure
that will
insanity.
happen here, but the this aquifer that we have, it supplies a lot of farmland in East Texas, and that is a very dangerous thing to mess with because once the water dries up, the farms go away, the hospitals go away, which they're already going away because of this administration, and then we have just empty towns. I don't know if you know about Sand Branch, but it's near Hutchins, which is I don't know if you're familiar with Hutchins, but they were supposed to have like a 10,000 person warehouse go in for immigrants and the unhoused. Um, they stopped that, but Sand Branch, which is very close by, is completely out of water. And I'm talking like 30 to 40 minutes outside of Dallas out of water. Like they have to have it delivered to their town. So they are just slowly condemning these houses to die off and the communities to die off and the businesses to leave. And so it's very bad for small economies. It's driving people back into the city that's unaffordable or further out where they can't afford because they can't sell their property.
Mhm.
So they're just stuck. So it's creating um, a lot of really bad things. So it's not just the environment, it's not just health, but it is literal chaos in neighborhoods.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's intentional.
Hmm.
They're targeting these neighborhoods that are historically black and brown and marginalized and immigrant communities. They're hitting them really hardly,
Yeah.
and it's directly intentional. It's to get them to move. And
Away.
people have had to move. People have had to, like I said, sell their homes and move to a different area. They've had to move out of the state. But unfortunately, no matter where you go, you're probably going to run into one of these AI data centers at some point.
Yes.
And I grew up in Independence, Missouri, the home of President Harry S. Truman. And my hometown approved the bonds to build this multi-billion-dollar AI data center, despite community members rising up in record numbers. I
Yeah.
have never seen my community rise up like that. I live across the state line on the Kansas side now, but I never saw that community rise up like that. And this is
And they're
bipartisan.
doing the same thing. The water down here when the aquifer was when they're trying to get like the rights to the aquifer's water, it was a bipartisan thing. A lot of we even had Republican legislators coming in and saying something, which is phenomenal. But I mean, they had Republican legislators against it. They had the Republicans against it. They had all the Democrats there. They had everybody there like throwing fits about it, and they still like they put it off, but they sent it to Austin. So they're not even dealing with it because they don't want to get sued by the people that are trying to get the money, or they
Nope.
have them in their pockets, whatever the case is. It's really bad. And I don't know how quickly we're going to be able to legislate anything to make it better without massive amounts of detriment to the rest of the nation. I mean, we're already seeing Memphis struggling horribly, and then they just took away their representation as well. So there's literally nobody for them to listen to, or nobody, to hear their concerns. There's nothing, and that's what they're trying to do to all of the places. They're trying to get away with everything that they can get away with as quickly as possible.
I say it as this, I thought by now we would be done with these Jim Crow laws. However,
We've never been done with them.
yes, exactly. Now they're coming back even more so, or,
Yeah,
being expanded even more so now than ever, and
yeah.
directly intentional to disenfranchise, voters and take away their voices. My co-founder is based in Nashville, Tennessee, and was down at the state capitol, believe last Thursday, and it was very intense. Me and her are going to do another episode of our weekly show, or a bi-weekly show that me and her do, and she'll be doing a deep dive on what she saw while she was there. She witnessed a lot of things, she's seen a lot of things, she did some interviews, and obviously if you're listening to this, stay tuned for that. But it brings me to my last thing. How can people contribute to your campaign and uplift the work that you are doing? Because it is very expensive to run
Yeah.
for office. It is very expensive, even more so, to be grassroots. But how can people contribute to your campaign?
So you can go to chelseyhockettforcongress.com, CHELSEY, um, and go to the donate link and you can donate through ActBlue. I don't have anything else going on right now, and I probably should get another server, but ActBlue was a pretty easy one and a quick one to set up. So we can donate that way. Uh, Also, just follow me on socials because I'm having the hardest time beating an algorithm and I'm having a really hard time getting anything out. So I unfortunately started this at a very bad time to be on social media with the algorithms being just completely screwed up. I gained a good bit of following on TikTok because I dressed up as Ted Cruz and climbed out of the window to Alexander Hamilton. And so I'm decent there, but I'm still only getting like 60 views a video because Larry Ellison has like completely just like strangled my views there, and I'm having a hard time on Meta, and I know Blue Sky's on its way out, so it's kind of just a mess. So socials
Yes,
is the thing that I need people to join in on. But yeah, that's all I've got for that.
absolutely. Chelsey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate you.
Thanks
In the
for having me.
description of each episode, I always put the social media and the contribute and your website in the description of each one of these episodes. So obviously people can find you through that way. But again, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Of
Thank you.
course.
Do you want me to hang up?